Good morning, everybody. I'm just waiting for my colleague Mike to join.
Hi, Manus. It's Mike here.
Oh, hi, Mike. You're very welcome. Listen, I think, Mike, we're good to go. Let's first and foremost, let me introduce myself. I'm Manus Rooney here from the Brexit unit in Enterprise Ireland. You're very welcome to the first of a series of webinars we're doing on the topic of Brexit. Now, these webinars are designed to give you some insights and some of the learnings that we have seen now from our road trips and road shows around the country for the last 2 years. And what we want to do is try and give you some theory. So, Mike, just a little bit of theory, and then we're going to do a bit of a time then into the whole practical tools and tips of how you can prepare for some of the topics of Brexit. And we've been hearing this now from our clients around the country, both small and large, for the last 2 to 3 years. So, the topic of today is strategic sourcing. And before we just jump into some of the content, I just want to go through some housekeeping. So the webinar today should be about 45 minutes long. We'll have about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. So you can submit your questions to us via email at brexitunit@enterprise-ireland.com, or of course through the little button at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen through the messaging system there. We also plan to record it, and so in the next day or so, the recording will be available. So if you want to touch back into some of the content, or indeed pass it on to some colleagues who weren't able to attend today, please do so. But you'll get updates from our website in the next day or so when we have the recording available. So let's have a quick introduction to Mike. So Mike, you're still there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, Mike. So, quick introduction to Mike. So, Mike is the MD of Arvo, and Arvo use strategic sourcing tools and techniques to help small businesses, or small and large businesses, to reduce some of the costs and risks associated with Brexit. So, Mike has been with us on our Brexit journey, I suppose, for quite a while now, and has met with companies, small and large, to help implement some of this best practice around strategic sourcing. And we're delighted to have Mike here with us today to share some of those insights. So, Mike, I'm the MC, so I have one quick question before we start off, and that's, I suppose, when I first joined the Brexit unit, I must admit strategic sourcing as a topic wasn't something I had come across before. So, could you just explain to us and to the audience, like, what is exactly strategic sourcing? How do you describe it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's strategic sourcing is focused solely on procurement and buying. So it's understanding what purchasing activities the company has, what suppliers they're dealing with, and how they deal with them, whether it's really in terms of reducing costs or improving service or delivery. So strategic sourcing is a bit of a theoretical term, but it happens day to day. It happens when you're buying from your suppliers. And the idea is with a strategy around it, you're looking to continuously improve your strategy in dealing with suppliers, and you're focusing on improving profitability and service delivery from your supply base.
Okay, so if it's all about suppliers, then I mean I'm quite familiar with the whole area of supply chain management. Is there much of an overlap between something like that, or where does it start and end?
There certainly is a correlation. Strategic sourcing would focus on the relationship with the suppliers, whereas supply chain management would also look at the logistics and freight and movement and warehousing if there's products coming from that supplier into your own warehouse. So there's certainly a correlation. Strategic sourcing would acknowledge and account for logistics costs and logistics arrangements when you are looking to do a deal with a supplier, but supply chain management then would get involved in the management of the product, moving it from A to B.
Okay. Great, Mike. Listen, I'm going to drop off now, so I'll leave it over to you and we'll catch back later in the webinar. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you, Manus. So I'm going to go through some of the slides. As an example, I suppose, and Manus has mentioned that over the last 18 months, we have been working very closely with Enterprise Ireland. And this is some of the examples that we've come across around Brexit. This is some of the challenges that strategic sourcing is facing. So the first one there, a manufacturing business. Their supplier has a factory in Naas and Leeds, and there's an assumption or presumption that the products are coming from Naas. So in the event of a Brexit, if it's no deal or a hard Brexit, you need to understand exactly where the products are coming from, to understand if there is going to be customs and logistics delays, if there's going to be price increases. So that's one example. The second example is quite unique in one sense, but a client had their biggest customer is also their biggest supplier. So in the aviation sector, both are based, the customer and the supplier, which are the same business, are based in Bristol. So the challenge there is, if the products are coming into Ireland to be, in this case, sub-assembled and sent back to the UK, how can they renegotiate with that supplier? How can they change terms with that customer? And they need to understand what that customer's Brexit plans are before they can make any changes themselves. The third example there, which I think will affect a lot of businesses on the island of Ireland, it's when they have a UK agent, which is the sole distributor for products coming in from the UK and Ireland. So the UK business has a franchise, a license agreement. It's servicing the UK and Irish market as the same entity, which in future, if there is an event of a no deal or hard Brexit scenario, or if the UK becomes a third country, how are they going to service Ireland in the same manner as they have in the past? The fourth one down there is another area which I think a lot of companies need to be cognizant of. It's understanding the regulations or authorizations or accreditations that are EU-wide. So this example, I think there's a paint business. Their Northern Irish-based supplier is the holder of product authorizations under REACH. So REACH is a standard, a safety standard of quality and manufacturing of chemicals and hazard materials across the EU. Now that's a accreditation that takes 9 months to get, and if the Northern Irish supplier has it at the moment, and if they're going to be outside of Europe in the next couple of weeks or months, or even if it's 2 years after transition period, what is going to happen to that supply chain, and what's going to happen to that client in terms of getting that product, which needs to be certified to be used in Ireland. And the last example there, which I think a lot of SMEs are under pressure from at the moment, is where their customers, where the primary manufacturer in a large supply chain is advising them to stockpile components with no commitments to buy. Now this obviously is good for some suppliers in the space in that they can increase sales to SMEs, but also others don't have the capacity. So it's one thing to say increase your stockpile at the moment from 1 month to 4 months, but what if you can't get that product? Where does that leave you? So I just wanted to give you some examples of some of the challenges that we've come across, and as you'll see in a sec, we'll get into how to resolve those case studies. So in terms of an agenda for today, the first thing we're going to look at is just the Brexit impact on the supply base. Then we're going to find out which suppliers will impact the business the most. And we will say, and we've always said it, not all suppliers have the same Brexit risk. Not all suppliers have the same exposure to Brexit. So it's important to understand and categorize which ones do. And after we identify that, we're going to build in stability and relationships. So improving those supplier relationships to get through whatever Brexit throws at you. And finally, there's some tips and tactics to help you prepare for your supplier network. So that's essentially what we're going to work through. There is one takeaway in terms of the Kraljic analysis and the Kraljic matrix, which I want companies to use, and we'll get into that shortly. So firstly, what's Brexit going to do? What is the strategic sourcing impact? So Brexit is a political economic event. Uncertainty has certainly been the biggest challenge for businesses over the last number of years, and I think that's going to continue. So we did some research with over 100 SMEs last week, and the keywords there on the right hand side would highlight that uncertainty is the biggest challenge. And uncertainty is never good for business. It slows down decisions, and it doesn't move things along. So that has been the challenge to date. You'll see as a previous or the earlier slide identified the number of business risks. So Brexit is posing business risks to a number of businesses. Particularly, some industries are more affected than others. And I suppose the primary concern from sourcing, and the first one that's highlighted in bold, is the sustainability of supply. So if you're getting a product or service at the moment from the UK and Northern Ireland, how can you guarantee to get that product and service in future in the similar or equal terms of what you're buying it now? So that's the real concern, that if you cannot get the product into your warehouse, how can you service your customers? We highlighted as well the diverging standards. So 3 of the most popular or common standards that we've come across that people are concerned with. The first one is the CE marking. So if you're in a regulated industry and if you need components that are certified to be manufactured to European standard, if someone in your supply chain suddenly does not belong in Europe, how are they going to get that CE mark? So if your supplier in the UK becomes a third country, how are you going to ensure that you can get the product CE marked and approved within your regulated industry? REACH I mentioned already in terms of chemicals and hazard materials, and GDPR obviously was introduced last year. I think every business is aware of GDPR, but again, that's an EU-wide regulation. What happens when the information that you have or a company in the UK has based on your entity personal information goes outside of Europe? Now it does happen, but it just needs understanding what that risk might be. The volatility of currency, a lot of businesses will have noticed that. There's been pros and cons for that. It has settled down, I suppose, recently, but again, as we get closer to Brexit and as we get closer to that potential exit, we are expecting currency to fluctuate, so you do need to put a strategy around that. I think the next two are the key components or the key practical challenges. with a lot of businesses are going to impact. A lot of Irish businesses are going to notice. And the first one is the delay with imports and exports. So if it's been proposed that there's going to be a border, if it's been proposed that there's going to be customs and tariffs imposed, they need to be checked. There's a significant amount of administration and paperwork and bureaucracy that's involved. There's potentially delays at each port. I think every port in Ireland and the UK has acknowledged that the delays are going to be significant in the event of a hard Brexit or a no deal. So how is that going to affect your supply chain? What delays can you afford? Are your products perishable or not? So you need to consider the impacts there. And obviously with the delays on imports and exports, that's going to create an increased cost around imports and exports. So the logistics companies have a lot more work to do, and potentially they may need a second driver on some routes. And then there's also the challenge where the synergies and the groupage and the cohabitation, I suppose, that would have happened in the past around logistics, all that is exposed when a transport provider is going outside Europe. So that's the challenge, and we do expect a lot of those expenses and costs to be passed on through the business and passed on through the supply chain. Another concern with Brexit is the challenging migration. So access in the UK market in terms of employees, in terms of getting visas to work, and vice versa. I think it's not really a sourcing concern, but it's something to be highlighted. And the last concern we would see, the biggest risk I think for a lot of businesses, is the cash flow impact. So with the increased costs that everything above is going to entail, with the increased administration and bureaucracy, it might need new systems and new training for your employees. You mentioned earlier about stockpiling products. There's also the concern with VAT. So at the moment, if you're buying from the UK, it's zero VAT rated, but in future that's not the case. So VAT will have to be paid. We do hear it's going to be deferred, but there's a cash flow impact, and most businesses will be able to reclaim it back, but it'll still have to be paid at some stage. So that's really a concern in terms of cash flow and financing. So companies need to gear up for that working capital. So they're the risks. And in terms of what we do in terms of sourcing and purchasing, we use a tool called Kraljic analysis, or the Kraljic matrix. This has been around for over 30 years. I'll explain in terms of what's on the screen now, but this is a very simple tool, and this is the takeaway I want you to, I suppose, consider for today, to look at your business over the next couple of weeks. So the key is to understand which suppliers are going to impact you the most. So which suppliers we would deem as strategic. And a strategic supplier, irrespective of Brexit, is one that you cannot live without. It's one that if you got an email or phone call today, you wouldn't be able to sleep tonight if this business was folding or if this business couldn't supply you next week. So identifying what a strategic supplier is and identifying what's unique about that relationship which you have is very important. So that's the first step. And obviously, if they're based in the UK or based in Northern Ireland, there's a particular Brexit risk around that strategic supplier. Secondly, around the bottleneck suppliers. So a bottleneck supplier, again, is doing something very unique. There's very few alternatives. There's no competition, we'll say, limited competition in the market. They may be providing a product or service to you that has a trademark or a patent, and the challenge is, if you cannot get that product or service, you cannot supply forward to your customers. Sometimes we would see bottlenecks around labels or packaging. Maybe there's a particular patent or trademark or uniqueness in terms of the components that are being used. While on the grand scheme of things, it mightn't be the biggest item that you're buying, but it does prevent you selling, and that's the profit risk, and that's the impact that you need to consider of. So the bottleneck suppliers and strategic suppliers are the first ones to identify. Just to understand the rest of the matrix, leverage suppliers is where you have a significant amount of spend, but there's lots of competition in the market. So we would often see energy, electricity or gas as being a leverage supplier. So if you're currently with electricity and if they made a business decision to move out of the market, you'd have alternatives. So you'd Bord Gáis, Electric Ireland, Energy, etc. could all step into play. So a leverage supplier is not a huge risk because there is many options in the market. And the last one is the routine supplier. So the routine suppliers is low value, low risk. There's lots of competition. There's no real risk around Brexit with routine suppliers. So the idea is with maybe office stationery, furniture, travel insurances, etc. If your supplier failed, it wouldn't stop the business, and that's the idea. So just to reiterate, the Kraljic analysis segments your suppliers. It allows you to look at all your suppliers, or maybe the top 20 or top 100, depending on what number of suppliers you have, and it categorizes them based on the level of cost and risk to your business. And the idea is that you don't have to worry about all suppliers at once. You need to focus at this stage on your strategic bottleneck suppliers. And as you'll see there, in terms of the next screen, there, the Brexit focus has to be on the strategic and bottleneck suppliers. You need to understand which suppliers, if they could not supply you tomorrow, would impact your business, or which suppliers, if there was a difficulties dealing with them in future with regards customs administration, with potential delays, which ones are going to impact your customers. And just to reiterate, and so to work through an example, we created a fictitious company, a treehouse. They fabricate timber panels and for construction, and what the CEO and the CFO decided to do was look at their purchases, look at what the products they're buying, look at how much it's costing them, look at where they're being sourced, and look at the alternatives in the market. So I just want to work through a case study through the next 2 slides. And the idea is that you'll be able to take this back to your business over the next couple of days and analyze your own suppliers. This is the kind of takeaway that we're hoping business companies will use after this webinar, that this is a simple tool, the Kraljic matrix, which there's tools online, or you can research it further if you wish, and get some information. So as an example, we'll take forward, and we won't work through the entire slide. We'll take the top 2 and the bottom 2. Just to see how this operates, I suppose the type of product for the first example is insulation. In terms of relevance or importance, it's over 20% of what the company purchases. So 1/5 of what they buy is tied into a local distributor, which are based in Naas. I should have said that was Treehouse Suppliers are a company that's based in Athlone. So they're based in the Republic, and this is the suppliers that they're dealing with. So the location of the installation is Naas. The switching costs are low, and there's a few alternatives. On face value, with no deal or hard Brexit scenario, they will still be able to purchase the product, the installation from Naas. So we would perceive this as being a leveraged supplier. So when you look at the next slide, it's up in the top left-hand page. So leveraged supplier regards installation. There's really limited impact regards Brexit on face value. Now, I will say on face value, because while you categorize them leverage now, you do need to do some of the research and talk to your installation provider and find out where they're buying from. So if they're importing from the UK or Northern Ireland, then that's going to move them towards strategic, or that's going to move them towards a higher risk around Brexit. But just on face value, as we're doing this exercise, this is the example. The windows are similarly very important. You cannot sell your houses or timber panels without your windows. Again, almost 20% of what's being bought from an OEM, so it's an original equipment manufacturer, and they're based in Leeds. The switching costs are a bit more challenging, and obviously the higher the switching costs, the more difficult it is to change. And I suppose I should clarify with the alternative suppliers, the more alternative suppliers in the market, the easier it's to change as well. But however, going back to the windows, because of the fact that almost 20% of what you're buying is coming from a manufacturer in Leeds, and with our Brexit hat on, that deems them as a strategic supplier. So up in the top right, we've identified windows as being the most strategic supplier we have. We need to understand what to do about that. Skipping down towards the bottom, the paint is minimal. So in terms of what's been bought, it's less than 1% of the overall purchasing of what the company does. Now, it is from original equipment manufacturer, again in Liverpool. There is many alternatives available, but because the value is so low, because it's not in terms of strategic, it's certainly going to be a bottleneck because of the location in Liverpool, and that's down there on the right hand corner. Now, the paint one is almost close to the routine because there is alternatives, and if you found an alternative supplier in Ireland, then that would deem that you could get your paint from a non-Brexit exposed source in future. And just to kind of conclude the example, the nails coming from Navan, it's a local distributor, it's very small in terms of 1%, and that's a routine supplier. So when you work it through for your own business, you're going to end up with a handful of strategic suppliers, a number of bottleneck suppliers, and the remainder will be leverage or routine. And the idea is then that you can focus particular strategies on the strategic and bottleneck suppliers. It's not that you're ignoring the leverage and routine suppliers, but in terms of the initial face value, the initial impact to your business, if you get the strategic and bottleneck supplier risks reduced, it'll put you in a much better place. And this is how you're building the resilience into your supply base. So you're not taking them all at once. It's a simple tool that should categorize where you're focusing your attention. I suppose the other thing is this is a dynamic tool. So this will change as the facts around Brexit become known. Your Kraljic analysis will be updated. So you'll be able to survey your suppliers, you'll be able to focus initially on the strategic suppliers, and based on the information they're getting you, and based on what's happening with regards to customs union or non-tariffs or customs in particular products, you'll be able to move your suppliers around. So your strategic suppliers might move down to bottleneck or move over to leverage if their Brexit risk is reduced. And that's the whole thing with Brexit, I suppose. The level of risk and the level of exposure that you have is going to vary over time. And as the facts around Brexit become known, this analysis should be updated, and it's something that should be dynamic and updated maybe weekly or monthly throughout the next couple of weeks and months to make sure that your supply base has that resilience in it that'll help you to move forward as a business. So when you have them categorized, this is where we're getting into the solutions. The absolute first thing that we would suggest is to develop a long-term supply relationship with your bottleneck or strategic suppliers. Get to know your bottleneck and strategic suppliers better than you have already. Get to know where their risks are. Get to understand the management team. Get to understand the financial strength. Get to understand what investments they're making around Brexit. It's very important to start developing a partnership, because those bottleneck and strategic suppliers are unique to you. You may need them in future, irrespective of what Brexit looks like. You may be dealing with them for a long time, and it's very important that they're aware of your concerns and that they're working with you to continue supplying that product or service in future. So the absolute first thing that we would recommend is developing a supplier relationship management program with your bottleneck and strategic suppliers. And again, there's lots of support available from online or even from EI itself to work through that kind of program. The second thing with regards introducing guarantees or agreements, this is particularly important for your bottleneck suppliers. So SMEs in particular, or we would notice ourselves, a lot of SMEs don't do formal contracts with suppliers. It's something that you might shake the hand, or you have kind of a negotiation in terms of pricing, and you start the relationship. So at this stage, it is important to consider introducing a supply agreement. And this supply agreement should be cognizant of the risks in the market, and they are Brexit risks. So we've seen supply agreements being proposed at the moment for clients, and they're introducing Brexit clauses. So that's important to understand what might change in future regards to supply arrangement, if there's volatility around currency, if there's customs administration, who's going to the onus going to be, who's going to take the risk on that. But we do recommend that it's very important to start having a one-page document. It doesn't have to be a 100-page agreement or contract, which people don't have value or trust in. So start thinking about a one-page agreement with your bottleneck suppliers that they will continue to provide you with the product or service in future, irrespective of what Brexit is going to throw at you. The third option with regards group buying, to benefit from economies of scale. Group buying has been around for hundreds of years, but with Brexit, we've seen many Irish businesses considering bypassing the UK or NI supply chain. So what you're looking to do is you're looking to bypass the risk in your supply chain. And the challenges, we'll say, for example, bakeries at the moment. A lot of flour and sugar is being imported from the UK or Northern Ireland. Now, the Northern Ireland and UK aren't producing the flour and sugar. That's been imported into a wholesaler from further afield, be it Canada or Brazil or the States. Now, SMEs in particular haven't been able to access the manufacturers or producers of flour and sugar globally because they're looking to buy pallets or they're looking to buy bags of the product. But if they put their volumes together, they can start buying containers. And the idea is, if you're in a particular industry, you need to start thinking about how could you bypass the risk? How can you start working with possibly competitors or others in your sector? How can you look at bypassing where potential risks might be in the supply chain and volume leverage to buy a container load? It takes a bit of work, but it's something that we're working with a number of clients on, and it's certainly a viable option in this regard. Coming back down to number 4 there, in terms of the bottleneck suppliers again, if there is a particular bottleneck supplier that you have, and if there's a particular product or component that you need that's coming from the UK and Northern Ireland, over the next month, it's very important to think about increasing your ordering capacity. So have a think about what product or service that you need and what could you order in bulk at the moment and have it in your warehouse as opposed to their warehouse. The challenge is, I suppose, for businesses, if no deal occurred, there's definitely going to be significant delays at the border. There's definitely going to be delays around products and service administration, and you're better off having that component. If it doesn't cost so much, and if it doesn't take up too much storage, and if you can get your hands on it, have it in your warehouse as opposed to your suppliers. And the last thing that we would recommend, and it certainly is the last thing, is to start considering alternatives. So if you start doing some of the above and you start talking to your bottleneck and strategic suppliers, and if you're struggling to develop a long-term relationship with them, if you're struggling to get them to focus on Brexit, if you're not getting a Brexit plan that has some information where their Brexit risks are, it is absolutely viable to be looking at alternatives. Now, it's not easy for bottleneck and strategic suppliers. We're fully aware of that. It's not easy to start re-engineering your product or to start looking at alternative markets to find alternative suppliers. But it is something that it has to be looked at. You have to have a proactive approach. Even having a trial of a component at the moment, even going to a trade show across Europe that you may not have gone to before, it's important to start thinking about alternatives, just in case the supplier that you're dealing with in the UK is not geared up for Brexit, is not prepared to go through the administration and documentation hurdles that might be put at them. So you need to start looking at alternative suppliers for your bottleneck and strategic, if it's the case that they're not Brexit prepared, that your current suppliers aren't Brexit prepared. I'm going to reiterate one point, I suppose, the supplier relationship management. Again, it is a theoretical approach. If you search online or if you look for more information around supplier relationship management, there's lots of tools and templates. There's significant programs, there's books, there's videos, there's training, there's templates and draft documents that you can start developing and using to manage it and capture the best value from your business relationship. So supplier relationship management is a whole concept within procurement, and there's lots of information, like I said, online, and it's something that SMEs might not have exposure to. If you don't have a dedicated procurement and sourcing professional in the business, supplier relationship management might be a new enough concept. And I suppose it's no different to your customer relationship management. When you're minding your own customers, you need to mind your suppliers, and that's the whole idea here. And it's very important to do it, obviously, for the strategic and bottleneck suppliers. And with supplier relationship management, it is all about developing a relationship. It's developing that partnership approach. And we see that as being very important to work through whatever Brexit looks like, or what nobody is and really knows yet what Brexit is going to do in terms of customs and tariffs and VAT and impacts to the business or in particular industries. But if you develop a partnership with your suppliers, you'll both work on it together. So you'll understand what they want to get out of the relationship and vice versa. You'll understand what expertise or investments they can make in relationship and vice versa. So developing that partnership is a strong recommendation for us, and it's something to be reiterated. It'll take a bit of time if you haven't got a strong relationship at the moment, but it's certainly worth doing in the next couple of weeks. So I suppose kind of to reiterate or to summarize the tips and tactics that we went through, we would recommend from a sourcing point of view to build that resilience into your supply chain. Firstly, identify the risk. Categorize the risk, understand the likely impact of that risk around your supply base, and the tool that we use to do that is the Kraljic analysis. Like I said, there's lots of information online around this, or we have templates ourselves if you want to contact Arvo afterwards. But if you want to get a good handle on where the risks are in your supply base, start with the Kraljic analysis. It's not the most significant piece of work ever. We've done it last week with a number of clients. It takes 2 to 3 hours sitting down, going through your supply base and categorize them by strategic, bottleneck, leverage and routine, and from there you can put plans in place. The next thing is to start surveying your suppliers on their Brexit plans. The first question to ask all suppliers at this stage is, what is their Brexit plan? Now, we've seen lots of Brexit plans and none of them are right, because nobody knows what Brexit is going to do. However, the best Brexit plans we have seen have taken a root and nail review of the business. They understand where their exposure is within their supply chain, and they have alternatives, or they have contingencies that they can implement. And some businesses have been very proactive around Brexit already. They've started changing locations and jurisdictions and looking at alternative supply chains. So serving your suppliers on their Brexit plans is important. Also, just as important is serving your customers on their Brexit plan. So understanding, if you're in a regulated industry, the treatment of the CE mark or the REACH. So if your customers are demanding CE and REACH at the moment, what's going to happen if in post-Brexit, if the UK or Northern Ireland become a third country? What's going to happen to the requirement for CE or REACH? Are they going to recognise the new UK versions that the BSE are introducing, or is there going to be an exposure there? So understanding what your customers require and need around Brexit is very important. And I suppose we mentioned it before around supplier relationship management. That's the SRM. That's the key for strategic and bottleneck suppliers. I cannot reiterate it more in terms of building up that relationship, that partnership and that trust with your strategic and bottleneck suppliers. And from there, you'll both be able to work through Brexit over the next couple of weeks and months. So that's me. It was just a brief introduction of strategic sourcing around Brexit, and particularly around the Kraljic analysis and Kraljic matrix, which I hope the case study and the tool will help you through. Again, we have spreadsheets and templates on that. My email is there if you have any further questions. And speaking of questions, over to you, Manus. I'm not sure if there's any questions came through.
Yeah, we have 1 or 2 coming through, so we'll get to that. So listen, Mike, thanks very much for that. Some really, really useful insights. I think you mentioned there the word about building contingency, and I suppose that's one of the things we've been encouraging companies to look at since back in 2016. So a lot of these things around, say, contingency in your supply chain makes perfect business sense irrespective of Brexit. So whether you're benchmarking your existing suppliers or even having a plan B or a plan C in place for some of your key suppliers, as I said, makes perfect business sense irrespective of Brexit. And it's those type of decisions, those type of no regret decisions we're encouraging clients to take on. So let's take a few questions, Mike. We have a bit of time. One of the things that actually has come through here that's I'm going to read it out here is where you have specifically identified a supplier as being strategic. However, that supplier is based on a long-term relationship. So the supplier is based on a long-term relationship, and they have a great business relationship, great product, great quality, and also great terms. So how do I deal with it with a strategic supplier where you had that wonderful history that goes with that?
That's a very real case, and that's the example with a lot of clients that we've met as well with Enterprise Ireland. There are strategic and bottleneck suppliers that will be your strategic and bottleneck suppliers in five years' time as well. So irrespective of what Brexit throws at you, if they're based in the UK and Northern Ireland, you will have a huge dependency on them, but the type of relationship may change. So there may be documentation and bureaucracy. You both might be affected by import and export declarations. There may be customs and tariffs to be paid. There are duties. There could be potential delays. You might have to pay VAT on imports, which you've never had to do before. However, what their product or service is supplying you is unique. They may have bespoke developed a component for you, and it's going to be very difficult for you to look at changing that. So it's very important to understand what is their Brexit plan, what is their Brexit risk, and how committed are they to the Irish market, how committed are they to you as a customer. Understanding the percentage of their sales or revenue that are tied into your business or within the Irish market will determine a lot. And it's that, like you mentioned about having long-term relationships, credit terms, years of business, etc. That's exactly what a strategic supplier is. But you do need to understand how to get closer with them, and I suppose how to understand how you both can work through this together. So we would see that coming across with a lot of businesses. But obviously the SRM, the supplier relationship management documentation that we mentioned earlier, is the way forward to build that relationship with that strategic supplier.
So you mentioned there that building a relationship with a strategic supplier, and I suppose with that, when you engage with them, it comes some of those risks, and you touched on it as well there, Mike, in some of your slides. It's around this whole area of Brexit clauses, and we would, I suppose, see it quite a lot here in the unit, where companies are being asked about how they're going to handle price increases from currency fluctuations, etc. But can you give us a flavour of what you're seeing in terms of Brexit clauses? Like what's being covered, what are the typical headline topics, and how have you seen them being implemented?
Yeah, the Brexit clauses have definitely been introduced a lot in contracts and agreements over the last 6 months, particularly for clients who are putting pricing or proposals forward for the next couple of years. Sometimes you're trying to predict what's going to happen. So the Brexit clauses that we would see that are the most common are that, I suppose, in terms of titles, who bears the risk if there's any delays? Is time of essence with regards to deliveries? Who bears the cost if any changes that Brexit throws in terms of the administration? Will you be able to pass on the supply chain costs? It's important as well to seek mechanisms to revisit the pricing. So if currency goes plus or minus 5 or 10%, what's the impact, and how can you revisit pricing? Like lastly, obviously your margin and your pricing is impacted with a currency volatility like that, but the last thing you want to do is be tied into a contract where you're losing money by servicing the contract. Also, with regards to any contract, you're looking at the termination, how to draw a line under it, whether there's any penalties or retentions that need to be put in place. And it's something to be considered as well. Is the law or courts going to be Irish? Is it going to be EU courts, or is it in the UK? There's other areas that are common around GDPR and data protection. They're some of the headings that we would see clients introducing in their Brexit clauses, and I will underline it by saying, do get legal advice. So if you're drafting an agreement or a supply contract for the first time, draft it, put in your Brexit clauses, but do get legal advice to make sure that it does cover all eventualities and all risks.
Okay, there's some sound advice there, Mike. We have another question here about the whole idea of group buying. Sounds in theory like a great idea. How tricky is it to implement, and what are you seeing from some of your recent experiences there?
Yeah, as mentioned earlier, we are seeing growth in that space, and particularly we've a group that's forming at the moment within the bakery sector. Group buying, while it's not for the faint-hearted, it is something that's a very viable option. And SMEs have been group buying for over hundreds of years. Now, the challenge around group buying, sometimes it's around the governance and the administration. Sometimes there's a lack of trust in terms of what information is being shared. But if you can get a central entity or an association to take the lead, if you can have non-disclosure agreements in place, and I suppose with groups we would also recommend to kind of start small, as in focus on a particular non-risky category. Like you might focus on an indirect cost in terms of buying energy, as an example, and the idea is that if it works for that, you understand the synergy and how it operates. It does take a little bit of work, but the long-term value in terms of being able to bypass a risk in the supply chain, and obviously with group buying, the benefits also in terms of reducing costs. And I think that reducing costs and being more efficient is very important for Irish businesses over the next 18 to 12, 24 months.
Okay, maybe Mike, we have maybe chance for maybe one more question. And this question is around an Irish company that has a lot of interaction with a Northern Ireland supplier. And the question is, will supplies in the north have to make import declarations? So what is your sense of what do you see in terms of the imports? Now, I want to mention here as well, the next webinar we're planning is specifically around customs, but we should actually try and touch it, because I suppose the big thing we're seeing is a lot of our queries we get here in the unit around customs is
Yeah.
specifically related to suppliers. So both topics dovetail very well.
Yeah, they are, and we're working with a number of clients in the north as well, and we are fully aware that import and export declarations, administration with HMRC or revenue, are the biggest bureaucratic challenges that Brexit is going to throw at people. So businesses that are putting product across the border will certainly have in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, will have an export document into Europe, which will be into the south, and also the company in the south will have to produce an import documentation. And that's not like it sounds easy, but there's quite a bit of work to get set up as that. It's something that a lot of haulage companies will provide that service in terms of logistics, and so understanding as well if there's customs and tariffs, getting the advice from a customs clearance agent from the outset. And again, I know there's EI have plenty of customs and logistics experts on their panel as well. So contacting your DA if you're an EI client, or contacting Enterprise Ireland Brexit Unit directly and asking for that help is now's the time to do it.
Okay, great, Mike. Listen, I think thanks for all the input there. So what I wanted to do, just as I'm just looking at the time, we're just into 40 minutes now in the webinar, just to very quickly, as in terms of a wrap up, just to cover some of the various state supports. Now, I've left a slide up, and you can dip back into it later on when the recording is available. But also all the supports that are available here are included on our website under all supports. You can access all the various agency supports. But just to particularly highlight some of the supports from Enterprise Ireland, the first one there is the Act On initiative. So after hearing Mike's slides today, and if you're thinking through some of those strategic suppliers, ones that you feel have a greater impact on your business if they turn off supply or reduce supply over the next weeks and months, we have the Act On initiative, and that essentially allows someone like Mike to go out to your business and spend that couple of hours to go through your complete supplier base and understand which are the ones that you need to focus on specifically for Brexit. And that's delivered over a 2-day period. And I suppose most interestingly, it's delivered for EI clients free of charge. We also have the Be Prepared grant, which allows you to cover any areas of exposure to Brexit where EI can provide a grant of up to €5,000. We're also on the road with our Brexit advisory clinics. And then finally, we have our Customs Insight course. And as I mentioned, I suppose so much of what we're talking today about suppliers and the potential risks has a very dovetail effect into the whole area of customs and logistics. And we've built our own Customs Insight course to allow companies, open to anybody, to get a real understanding of some of the key terms and processes available around customs. So you can sign up for that on our website. As I said, it takes about 45 minutes, and it'll really give you a good grounding into some of the key terms and terminology. So I'll leave the rest of those other agency supports there. As I said, you can come back and have a look at them, and they're also available from our Prepare for Brexit website. So I think that's pretty much it from us for today. I suppose what I want to highlight before we leave is our next webinar will be in about 2 weeks' time on the whole area of customs. So we're delighted to have Celine O'Neill from Revenue, who will spend a bit of time looking at that particular topic. It's a real interest one as we go around the country. It's one that always keeps coming up. And then following that, we're going to look at two particular areas of finance. One around the area of currency and risk management, and also working capital management. And as you've seen today, Mike talked very much about the need or potential around stockpiling goods to address those bottleneck suppliers. And of course, any stockpiling has a direct finance requirement. So we'll look at the whole area of managing that working capital and what can businesses do to prepare for some of those challenges over the next sort of weeks and months. So I think that's everything from the Brexit unit. I hope you found it of use and of value. If we didn't get to your question, we'll get back to you shortly. Again, prepareforbrexit.ie is our website. Our email address is there along with our phone numbers. For any issue or question, give us a call and we'll see where we can help and point you in the right direction. So thanks everybody, and I'll see you soon at the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Manus.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you for all your help.
Welcome. All the best.